Now continue.
So I compete in half pipe skiing on the World Cup Tour. I am born and raised in the US. I actually compete for the country of Vanuatu, though, in the South Pacific, who I do diplomatic work with. And I've worked with at the United Nations for a big climate bill that they passed last year. And so my platform is whether you're on the top of a snowy mountain or a tropical island, climate change is affecting all of us. And athletes are some of the best spokespeople, because when people tell us something's impossible, we say, yeah, watch us do it. And that's what we need in the climate world. I came up with this topic to talk about kind of over the summer. I spend the summers at my family house in Connecticut, going into New York a lot, and I was doing a lot of climate work from grassroots all the way up to United Nations. And my family in Connecticut was actually the perfect people to try out a lot of these techniques and methods on. And I was at a community chat in Brooklyn this summer, and a lot of the people there were talking about how they don't know how to approach a lot of their family and friends on climate because they are not climate activists. And I was like, well, not everyone is going to be a climate activist, but you don't have to be a climate activist to be eco-conscious, to make choices, or to understand that you even are eco-conscious. Growing up in Connecticut, being outside was a big part of my identity. I also lived in New Hampshire, so childhood is very linked with outdoors. And I know that I have a step nephew who's actually about just a little bit younger than me, and he grew up upper state Connecticut with a very similar childhood, and he didn't really realize this summer that that was a privileged childhood, and that a lot of kids don't grow up with clean air and fresh water and space to run around and safe neighborhoods. And so that kind of spurred a lot of this conversation. So I do have slides, but they are minimum because it's more about a talk here than as much of the written content. But I will go ahead and share my screen.
And while you're doing that, let's welcome in Deja Davis, who I believe is somewhere in the neighborhood of Durham, North Carolina. Is that true?
I'm actually home in California for fall break, but I'm heading back to Durham today.
A softball star at Duke who's now doing grad work at that ACC school. Back to Jeannie.
Okay, so here I am. I've worked as a diplomat. I'm a documentary impact producer, a nonprofit founder for brain injury recovery and support, and a World Cup half-pipe skier. So the first thing I want to talk about is positive reinforcement. We got 2 puppies 3 weeks ago, and I found that just like puppies, getting people to start being eco-conscious and getting involved, I've talked a lot before about, you know, in the climate justice world, we're like, oh, you know, the world is burning down. There's all of these horrible things. There's earthquakes and floods everywhere. And then we're like, and why don't you want to be involved? Why don't you want to stress every day about what's going to happen? Why don't you want to put so much of your time and energy in? It's like selling a ticket to the Titanic, but everyone knows the ending, so nobody wants to get on board. So we need to start kind of where they are, and we need to give positive reinforcement when people are starting to get involved. You know, good job, I'm proud of you, thank you for doing this, your planet thanks you, your kids or grandkids are happy they have a planet to live on. Something that really makes them feel good about themselves. And within my talk, I just want to mention, you know, I do believe that 2 things can be true at the same time. You know, at the one hand, giving people positive reinforcement for doing what we consider the bare minimum isn't necessarily, you know, what we feel like we want to be doing, but it also allows a more positive space for people to be involved in and to want to be involved in and to get more involved. And that's what we really want. We've also used guilt trip. I got my dad is not a Trump supporter, but he also is not a Biden supporter. And in the last election, my younger sibling and I got him to vote for Biden on a full guilt trip. And we've gotten him to do some things on a full guilt trip. And sometimes that's, that works when you guilt somebody into doing this. These are photos actually of my 3-year-old nephew this summer that we taught to pick up trash and recycling at the playground at the beach. And the side, sorry, my dogs are out here.
Well, they're trying to guilt you into something.
Yeah, my mom was taking care of them. But we taught him to pick up trash and recycling, and actually which one was which. And it is one of his favorite things that he does. The first thing he does when he goes to the playground at the beach is run around and see what trash and recycling he can find and brings it to the bins and puts them in. And that has been a great representation of teaching kids young and teaching them how to care about, things they love. He loves the beach playground. He loves to be around it. And it's also helped teach his older brother, who has not been very eco-conscious at all in the past, that if his 3-year-old little brother can do it, so can he. So I was actually at the United Nations this summer, and the chief economist was talking about how the economy does follow trends, and we do see that represented in our current market. And although that is slow and it's not the only solution to the eco problem, certainly, I found that I brought my dad to the grocery store this summer, and he didn't know the brands. He's 75 and he has been buying pretty much the same brands over and over again because he knows what they look like, and he doesn't want to put on his glasses at the store and read what the other products are. So I went with him and we took a little video and we went through what are some of the replacement products that he already uses, such as the plant-based biodegradable plastics for the trash bags, the reusable, we got some reusable cloth for the kitchen, as well as like the 7th generation, as you see on there, or bamboo toilet paper, more natural cleaning products. And I pointed out to him where they were in the store. And that actually had never really crossed my mind, that for especially a lot of the older generation, they buy what they know because it's hard for them, like physically, to find new products. My dad has to wear glasses and look really close at labels to see what they are. So actually finding what is eco-friendly for him is hard. And I hadn't really realized that actual tactical aspect of it. So being able to go in with family members and friends, or posting on your stories, or just having little links of here are, products that you can switch to that are more eco-friendly, and talking about how by buying these products, you are helping to support the environment, and you are helping to make sure that there's, clean air and that there's good places to be outside. For a lot of us, I know that, being athletes, our sports are outside, and a lot of our family likes to spend time outside. So talking about kind of that direct correlation of what you consume and what you buy and what you put in your house really shows what you care about. So I started to, I made him lists. I put out photos. I started to order him some of these products so that he doesn't have to spend as much time worrying about using his eyesight that isn't very good.
Very sharp.
One of the biggest things I've also learned is talk about your passion. I obviously love being in the eco space, and here at film festivals, even, there's a lot of networking events, and I always talk about it when people say, like, what do you do? Well, this film is about a traumatic brain injury story and traumatic brain injury recovery, But I also am a climate activist, and I compete for the country of Vanuatu, and I work in the UN, and I do grassroots organization work and community organizing. And I talk about it because I love it. And I talk about it around everyone. And I don't talk about it in a way of you're a bad person if you're not like me. It's just this is who I am, and I love it. And it's kind of under that same umbrella where people, when you were a kid and your parents be like, well, how was your day? Well, my day was great. Today I learned this or that. I've watched so many documentaries this summer on different aspects of the environment. We were in Maine, and there were so many about like the oystering and lobstering industries up there that was really fascinating, and I've never learned about. There was just so many different documentaries that are tied into the environment that I've watched this summer. And so talking about them, where even when I know somebody it hasn't really thought about the whole, like they say climate change on the news or something, but it's coming as from a place of I'm really interested in this, so I'm sharing it because I'm interested in it. And I found that has actually allowed for other people to be involved in the conversation more, and to talk about how they as well care about certain aspects, because everybody does. Let me tell you, nobody wanted to be in New York this summer when you couldn't go outside because of the smoke. Nobody wanted to be in New York this fall when there was flooding everywhere and you couldn't leave your apartment and the whole city was shut down. Nobody wants these disasters. So everybody does care about the environment some level, but sometimes they've been skewed in the direction that even being a environmental activist means that you are doing environmental terrorism, or you're really trying to do these huge movements, which are valid and important and people need to do. But those people you're talking to, you're not going to get on board to do these big movements. They're going to come in little steps. They're going to come in and recognize that their childhood of being outdoors was privileged, where we know people who ended up with cancer because of the proximity that they lived to drilling oil and to the toxins of that. And we know other people in other areas of the country that have health issues because of what they were exposed to. Also, the climate origin story. So I did a climate origin story with Imagine 5 this summer, which is a eco magazine. And as I said before, much of my childhood was closely related to nature. I really can't think of childhood without being outside, playing, doing my sports, skiing. I also did a bunch of other sports as a kid, and talking about how that made me interested in climate. I didn't grow up with a story where all of a sudden I noticed it. It was like I always grew up eco-conscious. My family just was. We were not weird, like we weren't hippies. We weren't like, we lived in Fairfield County, Connecticut, outside of New York, like a very nice area, but we never used any chemicals on our lawn. Our lawn is now mostly moss. It's wonderful. But my parents just thought that was bad. It would run off into the river. We had our kids, we played in it. The dog played in it. We didn't have much grass. It was mostly wood. So we didn't use chemicals. We composted. My sister started it because we had woods and we could put our food scraps out in the woods and compost them. We never left the lights on too long because that was wasteful. Like, turn off the light if you're leaving the room was always what we grew up with. My house still doesn't have air conditioning. My dad has one little box in his room that he turns on when it's really hot, but otherwise we don't have air conditioning in Connecticut. We live under some giant trees. There was maybe like 8 days spread across the summer that felt pretty hot, but I'm 2 miles from the beach. So we go to the beach when it's hot. And my mother will never let our house be above 65 in the winter, which I don't mind because we wear sweaters and sometimes hats and scarves, and that's how we grew up. But it wasn't until I was a teenager and I started traveling more for my sport and meeting new people and really realizing that not everyone shared the same viewpoint as I did of we have to respect and protect what we love. And that's when I started getting more and more involved, as well as being a skier. I've watched glaciers melt around the world. Yes, uh, Jackie.
Sorry, is it okay to jump in with questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. First of all, this text message to your dad is amazing. It's a great story.
That is from my dad. That is after he read my story. That was his story that he responded with.
My question is just, how do you think about this when you are interacting with people who maybe didn't have the same, upbringing and relationship with nature as you, and who find it? I think I'm somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, and I think sometimes I find some of the things that you're talking about, like even the really basic things, can be really intimidating. Composting, having a lawn that fits in with your neighborhood without using chemicals. And I think for some people, they're coming from even further away from that experience. So how do you help people feel welcome when you're talking about this?
Well, that kind of goes back to the last slide, or talk about what you love, I find. And it is definitely like a conversation in my town in Connecticut, and even in Park City. There's a lot of people that do chemicals on their lawn. That's super common. Everyone in Connecticut has a lawn service, literally everyone except for my family. And so I think just being being an example and talking about it. So we have a very small yard in Park City, and we have a lot of dandelions, and our next door neighbor absolutely hates it. And everyone who walks by our street can see our dandelions. And we are often out there and we're like, we love them. We think that they look like little bursts of sunshine. And a lot of our neighbors have been like, oh, I never really thought of that. And then we can go into being like, yeah, and they're really good for the bees, and they take up, like, did you know that they actually have a lot less need for water? The roots are stronger, because everyone in Utah knows that we've been in a drought for a long time. Like, we're just a dry state, right? So the way that we've populized the state, we don't have enough water to actually support our needs. And Great Salt Lake is starting to dry up, which can release chemicals into the air. And there are people in Salt Lake that don't know that, but there are a lot of people who do. And so kind of talking about it in like a very friendly way. Like, I do this because of these reasons, and I like it because of these reasons. And I found that starting with yourself of why you care is a better way of getting someone else to think about that for the first time. And then they might need to be the ones to approach you again. So it's not as much like confrontation. I mean, we had neighbors that have a new lawn in Connecticut, and they were still running their sprinklers when it was raining for a week. And we saw them out and we were like, oh, like, by the way, did you know that your sprinklers were still on when you're working? And she was like, oh, I should probably turn those off. Like, that's probably why I have that big puddle in my yard, because it's raining and my sprinklers are going on. And I was like, yeah, I didn't know if you knew that, because like I didn't know if you were at work or something. She's like, yeah, I am. So I didn't, like, it didn't cross my mind. So like, yeah, thanks. Like, I'll turn them off when it's raining. That's a good idea. And so kind of, and it is like, for me, I was like, I don't know why you need like this shiny yard. It drives me nuts. People don't even use their yards. I'm like, let the grass grow long, let there be nature, like throw some wildflower seeds out there, look way better. But there's also, if you find, depending on how close you are with the people, there are a lot of like studies, and it depends also on the age. Like, my sister lives in Salt Lake City. Her and her husband are very eco-conscious, but in a very normal way. Like, they do not consider themselves to be, extraordinary in any way. And they have like one of the little Lumi machines that does the composting, and they do pay, I think it's like $30 a month for that service. And my dad and my brother-in-law's mom both said, well, that's a lot of money. And their response was, well, both of you could afford it. Both of you, his mom is a doctor, our dad is a retired businessman. And so helping to kind of change the narrative of like, well, you can afford to help save the planet. And it depends, obviously, if they can or not, but there are certain things that we can all do. We've used cloth instead of paper towels in our kitchen for decades, and it washes and cleans so much better. So sometimes just showing people that like, oh, like I prefer to use this and this is why, can help bring them to the table. And yeah, that text, after my dad read my story in the online post that I sent him, he responded with this as his story. And he does not consider himself to be a climate activist at all. He's very much like a white old man in America. But he's started to discover that because he picks up trash and because he turns off the lights and because he doesn't have AC and because he doesn't spray his lawn, therefore he is eco-conscious and he does care about the environment and he is supportive of being a climate activist. And we've talked a lot about how that can translate into policy. We do all of this stuff because we need the policy. We need people like my dad, my stepnephew, all these people that are just living their life kind of, in a bit of ignorance that other people don't live it the same way and don't have these same kind of freedoms, and such as, yards and air and nice, clean places, to be able to notice that they care that they have that, they care about it. And that's why they have to vote on local and federal policies and for politicians that will protect what they love. And that is from like town levels up. There are things in everybody's towns that, want to get rid of the park or the nature preserve to build a new housing development. Or in a lot of places in the US, there's drilling or there's factories and there's pollution, and that is dangerous for people. And, again, growing up outside of New York, 9/11 was a really big thing. I was pretty young, but, my parents knew people that passed away. And every year my dad watches the 9/11 memorial. And there are now just as many people who have died from cancer due to the toxins that were around 9/11, that many of them first responders that were told that it was safe to be in that area at that time when it wasn't. So now there are just as many people that have died due to the toxins from 9/11 as there are people that died in that actual terrorist attack. And so that's a huge number of people. And obviously it's a very well-known event in US history. So trying to talk about how, because they care about these things, means that they care about what happens to them. And that's what we vote on. And that's what our governments work for, is for what we vote them in to work for. So making sure that they, know that's what matters. I brought my niece and nephew actually to the state capitol in Utah. This was actually for foster care reform. But I brought them to my meeting, and that's my nephew at 6 years old sitting in the governor's seat, because I wanted him to know that when you want government to support you and to change and to do what you want them to do, you can go and talk to them. Government doors are open. People will take what you say, and they may not do it, they might not vote on it, but they will listen to you. So that's what I've talked a lot about with, my family as well, where my dad keeps being like, well, Biden is too old. I don't like him that much. Well, it's not just the president. It's that the president appoints all of the different cabinet members and so much people further down. And so we either have this entire branch of the government that does care about things like the environment and human rights and gay rights and all of these other things, or we don't. It's not just this one individual. That's not how our government works. Yes, we have a president. Yes, they're, they have certain powers, but it's not a dictatorship. They are not end all be all. There are, and so also, like, a lot of people don't even know how politics and government works. There are a lot of people in the US that don't understand that the president doesn't even make unilateral decisions. Like, they understand it somewhat and they don't on the other hand. So basic understanding of politics can also go a long way in helping people understand how what they actually care about can be represented in government, and especially on a local level. Like, that's how we have a lot of public transit in our areas is voted on a local level, or, the maintaining our local parks or waterfront areas is a local level. So caring about the politicians that will, protect that, protects these people's, memories, their favorite walking places, things such as that. And so kind of helping to bridge that gap in their mind that they won't always have their park or their nature preserve or some of these things that they might love if they aren't actively making sure that other people are protecting it as well, and that the people in power are also protecting it. So that actually is the end of what I wrote down, because I wanted to be able to have some time to chat with you guys and talk about where you're coming from, what ideas you might have. And so I will stop sharing my screen so that we can just go back to chatting.
Thanks.
So if anyone, yes, Lou.
Oh, no. I just want, Jeannie, thanks for, first of all, putting this together, the way it flowed. I mean, I had so many oh my gosh, this idea is great. How come I didn't think of that? And I've been doing this a long time. So I've thought about it for a long time. So really, thank you for the insights. Thank you for the time putting together, and thank you for doing it. Yes, I would love to get y'all's questions, takes, thoughts. So I'll be quiet, and I know that's hard to believe, but I will. And I'll let, please take the floor, whoever, and unmute yourself.
And for me, my master's is in environment and energy policy. So it's really nice to hear that I can try to make a difference through policy in that way. Cause that was my goal, is because I believe policy is a really great way to make change.
Absolutely. I also agree. I think that policy ultimately is the way that we will make change in society, but the way that we get policy done is by the vote and who we put into office and who we put into these voting positions. And so making sure that we are getting people to the level of consciousness that they want to vote for people who care is kind of what this whole talk is about. Because I know a lot of people are like, well, just buying the eco-friendly products at the grocery store isn't going to save the planet. I'm like, no, it's not, but it might make that person realize that they care about the planet and be another vote towards a politician who will make a policy that will make massive changes that will help save our planet. Lou, you're muted.
Like I said, unmute yourself. When I talk about voting, I talk about it in three ways, and I think it's as important a four-letter word as there is out there. Vote with your ballot, vote with your pocketbook,
Mhm.
what you buy and what you don't buy, and vote with your mouth as to what Jeannie's talking about. Like when you're sharing what you believe in essence, you are voting. You are putting yourself, the ballot that you're using in that case is you're caring to share this with somebody else, what you're passionate about. Anyway.
I think like on the topic of voting, also making sure we vote not just for presidential elections, right? But like locally. And I think that's been a big thing that even I've become more aware of recently, or like once I got to college. And so trying to like encourage people around that it's not just the presidential vote, there's other votes that impact policy locally.
Yeah, and a lot of those actually affect a lot of people even more, especially around like public transit and public lands in your area, because that's what a lot of people use on a daily basis. And some of them are like protected where like the city's never going to get rid of the
Whoops.
subway system
I
or
didn't mean to do that to
certain
me.
parks, but there's a lot of things that are always kind of up for grabs, and it depends on who's around. Park City recently, as a town, purchased this old like massive ranch to be able to put it into a land trust and protect it instead of having developers buy it and develop more. And so that was a big voted on decision in my town of Park City. And a lot of most of the locals all supported it because we don't need more development. But another really cool movie is Wildlife, and it talks about a couple, and the man started in North Face and the woman was one of the first CEOs of Patagonia, and they bought over 100 million acres in Patagonia, Chile, and donated it to the Chilean government as the largest land donation into a federal park in the world. And a really well-known director, Jeanee Crane, directed it, and it's really beautiful. And that's also a subject that is kind of new to the eco world of buying land just to protect it. So that was a really cool movie that we were able to watch as well this year. Documentaries are a great way. If you have like downtime with your family and they want to watch something and you put on a interesting documentary, there's a lot of really good ones that are very captivating and aren't too like confrontational. They're just a really interesting story, and it happens to be around protecting the environment.
Are there any in particular that you would suggest that are in that captivating but not, as controversial?
So I would definitely recommend Wildlife. It's also interesting because both the brands Patagonia and North Face are like very well known. So it's pretty cool to see like how they started, because they talk about that as well. And then how like this story started. So that one is a really good one. There's another one called Deep Sea Rising. It's a little bit more deep, and it talks about deep sea mining, and it does it in a really interesting way where you also learn a lot about the ocean that you don't know before. And it goes in, it doesn't tell you what to think, it shows you all of these things. It talks to different scientists, it talks to this, it basically shows the journey of the CEO who's trying to deep sea mine to be able to support the metals that we need in electric cars and in solar panels and all of that stuff. And he talks about how, like, in his opinion, nobody's going to miss these things at the bottom of the ocean, and you only need X amount till you could reuse them and reuse them and reuse them. But then there's other like scientists that talk about how, those little modules have been growing for billions of years and we don't know the effects. And like, it was very interesting, again, because they don't tell you what to think. You come up with your own opinion, and you come up with the opinion because you have a knowledge and a feeling from this film that you didn't have before. So it's called Deep Sea Rising, also Wildlife. And I've watched a lot this year, so I'm trying to think of what other ones are really good. I can come up with a list and send it to Lou as well. There's
That'd
also
be
like
great.
smaller ones. Like I didn't know how actually the lobster industry is very eco-friendly. In Maine, they have a lot of very specific rules on maintaining the population of lobsters, and it is very hard to get a lobstering license. They can only be owned by individuals. So like a company can't own it. A company can only buy lobsters from an actual lobster fisherman, and you can pass it down in your family or give it to somebody. But because there's only a certain amount that they can even have. And like if there's a female that has a bunch of like eggs on the outside, they put a little notch in her tail and put her back, and then no one will farm her because it means that she's a good producing female. So the biggest threat to lobstering is the warming of the ocean, and they're starting to go further north. And so that's an interesting conversation, especially for Maine and for lobster in the US in general, of all the people who like to eat lobster, is that if the oceans get too warm, all of our lobsters are going to become Canadian. And a lot of Maine's whole economy runs off of lobstering. So that's like a big threat to Maine, is that the lobsters are going to walk into Canada. As well as that oystering is very eco-friendly. You just need a little crate and you just put it in the ocean. And there was a documentary that talked about oystering, and they also talked about how the restaurants and like the whole media about how oysters are like this very expensive luxury, food, is very detrimental, because we can produce and grow oysters without making any impact on the environment, because oysters actually help clean the water. So water is always cleaner with oysters, and they're a good source of protein, and you can actually cook them in many different ways. You don't have to just eat raw oysters. But society still thinks of them as this luxury product because they're sold so expensively. And if we
But just to pop in there, as a self-proclaimed vegan, I'm mostly vegan, but I eat bivalves, and it's not just oysters. Clams and mussels and scallops are all cleaners of the water. And also, if you're like someone who cares about animals, because there's both reasons why I do that, they have no central nervous system.
Yes.
So, but anyway, just for anyone who's looking to have a light bulb moment, it's not just oysters, it's clams, mussels, scallops, bivalves are all cleaners of the ocean and very sustainable.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah,
I want to add one thing to that too. Just one other thing. There is, for those of us in the New York area, there is a great nonprofit called the Billion Oyster Project. And so I put them in their link in the chat. And they are all about repopulating the East River between Manhattan and Brooklyn with 1 billion oysters, with the goal of cleaning up the river through that repopulation. And they're on their way. And they are a phenomenal organization. I wanted to ask a question to Jeannie, and this is also to the group, like how do you feel when presented or having the opportunity to talk to a family member, a friend, an individual, or a small group who are likely to be skeptical, not into it, doubtful, what have you? How do you because for me, I have to overcome my own, do I really want to get into this kind of thing in my own head? And then I of course will say, well, if I don't get into it, they're going to keep thinking what they think. But I still have to overcome that personal break that I put on myself. I don't know if this is relevant to anybody, or it may just be a Lou thing.
I try to think about it more recently in the kind of the slide of like, talk about what you love, where it's something about, you know, whether it's with family, like, oh, like I got to go into the United Nations today. That was super cool. And this is why. Or I watched this really interesting documentary that I never thought about before. And it, talking to them like they have something to add to the conversation, even if I know that they've never really thought about it or they've never really been, you know, in an eco space, but talking to them like, you know, like leaving an expectation that they're going to respond and be part of this conversation with you. And then like in a lot of these networking settings, instead of being like, you know, these are, you know, a lot of it, it's very, this festival is very like glamour, and there's a lot of influencers, and it's very different than a lot of the documentary festivals we've been to. And so instead of changing the expectation, where like at Mountain Fell Mentality Ride, everybody is you know, eco-friendly there. Instead of changing it and being like, well, no one is eco-friendly here because they have fancy cars and yachts in this town, being like, well, when I'm networking, this is what I do. And a lot of people think it's really cool that I compete on the World Cup tour for Vanuatu and I've been in the United Nations. And they want to respond in a way that I will think that they are cool. So they also talk about some reason that they care about the environment, because I've made it that is the cool subject to talk about at this networking event, where there are people showing off why they think that they're cool with their clothes and makeup and cars and stuff like that.
Anyone else on that topic? Well, I'm going to add one thing that, like, I've been forcing myself to talk, to try and find, not that I have to go that far, to find folks who are not into this, or at least somewhat skeptical. I happen to live in a building where I'm a freshman kind of thing. A lot of, like, and I'm 64, so that means a lot of septuagenarians, octogenarians, and I meet them in the gym, and I can, you know, if they're watching Fox News and whatever, I can get, okay, this. And when I first did it, I failed miserably. Like, I got into an argument with a guy, and I'm like, no, Lou, that is not good. Not good. And then I started to think about it, and kind of like in, oh no, Jeannie fell out. Oh, Jeannie's coming back.
All right.
Anyway, you didn't miss anything. I was just, so I thought about it, and I thought, okay, figure out what you think this person might be interested in and be concerned about, and know that there is a climate aspect to this. So the next time I got into it, someone else, you know, the topic of immigration came up, immigration from the southern border in the United States. And I brought up, well, you know, this is a complicated problem. It's been going on for decades, you know, Republicans, Democrats trying to like not make it like it's all Biden's fault. And I said, you know, one of the reasons people are moving, you're seeing these mass migrations from south to north all over the world, you know, climate change is impacting this. And, you know, what do you, have you thought, what do you think about that? And then there was a little skepticism there. And then I kind of gave a little bit more about it. And I'm not going to kumbaya it for you and say, oh yes, I got a convert right there, because that would be a lie. But I got at least a discussion, and I didn't get, you know, I could tell that he did not click off, like, and so the next time I'm going into the gym, I'm going to get into, well, you know, because I have a feeling he won't like, oh, you know, what ISIS did in 2014, 2015, and there was a mass migration from Syria, and ISIS was involved. You know, there are data that show that the climate fueled that mass migration. So I'm going to say it that way and see how that works. So one thing I'm learning is it's not going to be overnight, and keep on trying to get your own game better, which you as athletes know intrinsically more than us regular normal human beings with very little to no athletic talent.
Yeah, this summer, my dad actually told his cousin, his cousin's house was part of the flooding in upstate New York. And his cousin was talking about how, natural disasters have always happened. And my dad said, yes, but now they are more frequent and at higher magnitude because of the climate changing. And I was like, yes, exactly.
Boom.
Because, yes, there has always been floods and earthquakes and fires and tornadoes and all of those things, but not at the same magnitude. But, the smoke quality is something that was really eye-opening this summer to a lot of people on the East Coast, because those fires came from Canada and they made it impossible to go outside across the entire East Coast of the US, where people don't think about fires. In Park City, we think about fires. We get smoke from California most summers, and we have our own fires in Utah. But on the East Coast, people don't think about it, and they didn't think about how it wasn't even anything in the US, it was from Canada. And that was like a really good, showing of how a natural disaster due to climate crosses borders and affects mass population, and is something that no one could pretend that they were not upset about how smoky it was.
It impacted EcoAthletes, and it actually impacted Talia, if she remembers. Not Talia, I'm sorry, Gianna. Because we were having an EcoAthletes New York area champions get together at the Liberty WNBA. And by the way, they're in the finals tonight, game 4, go Liberty. Liberty Minnesota Lynx game in Brooklyn at the Barclays Center. And Patches was going to go with me and some others. But because of the orange sky and the health risks, they canceled the game or postponed it. Because of the health, even though the game was indoors, they postponed it because of the health risks to getting to and from it. And now I remember, Gianna, you were not back in the States. I think you were not working for the Liberty at that point. So I maybe I was incorrect in looping you into that.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, one other thing, are you guys familiar? Have any of you heard of the 6 Americas of global warming studies? So it's from the Yale Center on Climate Communications, which is a great organization. Also, by the way, just put that on the side for a second. We are going to be putting together a toolkit for the EcoAthletes Champions, which will have all these resources listed that you can then go to without having to think to ask us, or if it won't be exhaustive. There will be some that won't be there, but Yale Center on Climate Communications is one of the great organizations in this space, and they do polling in the US and beyond on attitudes on climate. And I'm looking at their latest. So they segregate attitudes on climate into 6 different groups: alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive. And I remember this has been going on they've been doing this for 10, 15 years. And I remember when I was first doing this work around that time ago, the alarmed was maybe 9%, and the 9 or 10%. The dismissives at the other end were about 10%. It was like a bell curve, a classic bell curve, like the people who were really alarmed and the people who were like dead set against it at the lower end, and then in the middle, cautious and disengaged. Well, right now we're at 26% alarmed. This is 2022. 26% alarmed, 27% concerned, 17% cautious, 7% disengaged, 11% doubtful, 11% dismissive. And that shows that things are moving in our direction. But to me, like, the thing that's going to get us to the tipping point is going to get, we need to get the concerned to the alarmed and the cautious and disengaged to the concerned. The dismissives at one end, like the hard, like, no's, you're going to spend a lot of time there if you want to, but I think it's going to be hard to get them. But it's the people who are concerned and, are thinking about it, but don't do anything about it and don't vote about it. Those are the people we got to get. That's where I think that's where the votes are. Votes in all different senses of the word. Anyway, I just thought, and I will send that link to you as well. Any other comments or thoughts? Because I want to be respectful. Go ahead.
I was just curious if, before we go, if there's anyone else who had an unexpected interaction where, you were talking about something that you didn't expect it to take a climate turn, and the person steered it that way, or made a comment that you might not have thought that person would have that kind of consciousness or connect those dots, sort of like the one that she spoke about with the weather, where it's like, yeah, but they're just more frequent and more powerful now. Has anyone else had interactions like that?
I've definitely had interactions, Patches. I've definitely had interactions where I guess, like, people kind of like associate me with climate now. So people who I wouldn't normally expect to care about climate come to me. Like, I recently had a teammate come back from vacation. She came back from vacation and she was like, yeah, I was thinking about you on vacation. There's a big plastic pollution problem there. And I was thinking about, how we could, like, I don't remember where she was or what exactly the details were, but it just struck me because she's definitely not someone who would normally care about something like that. And just, it wasn't even a conversation that I had with her. It was just kind of like, the nature of hockey teams. I kind of get made fun of for being the climate person. And then, it just gets people, like, thinking about it in a way that they might not otherwise.
Yeah, my aunt likes to tell me things like she went and cleaned up the beach, or she bought organic vegetables, and she'll, like, text us and be like, I'm so proud of myself, I did this. And that's her, like, the positive reinforcement. We're like, woohoo, good job.
Yeah.
And another.
Go ahead, Patches. Sorry.
I just wanted to sort of talk about, like, the sister to what Jeannie's been talking about, which is, everyone's on this call because they're passionate about the environment. Sorry, my GPS is talking. I'm pulling over right now. The other thing is, people love to talk as opposed to listen, and they love to talk about themselves and what they care about. So sometimes I have my antenna up, that when I talk to people, because there's nothing that somebody cares about something that's affected by climate change. Probably multiple things. So we had a great presentation about somebody who's looking to, like, naturalize and like golf courses, for example. And what I thought was such a cool little connection that made in my brain when we were talking about that, and we were connecting it back to policy. I think it's 70% of CEOs play golf. So when you're talking about people who are at the level of making kind of sweeping changes, people who are influential at that level, and this is why EcoAthletes is just so awesome, is that, those conversations, two of the things that you have small talk, often weather, which is so easily connected to climate change, and sports. So, if your sport is not the one that someone cares about, you could always have that conversation to steer it towards, so if you're a swimmer and someone's talking about football, or if you are a lacrosse player and someone's talking about basketball, you're still like the eco athlete in that conversation. And, hopefully through some of your interactions, you'll have learned about different things that relate to the other sports when people are talking. But finding out what if they're an animal person, I mean, there's just so much going on in the planet that relates to animals. You know, so many people love animals, and what was happening with the wildfires in Australia in particular, they seem to really focus on that. And there's just always a way to like find out what people care about and get them talking, and then just our little input about how that relates to climate is another way to just sort of plant a seed.
And I put in the chat, so the rewilding sports conversation with a heavy emphasis on golf was our last community chat, which some of you might not have been able to come to. And it was given by a fellow named Ronnie Eppelbaum, who works for something called GEO, Golf Environment Organization, not surprisingly located in Scotland. I think it's really interesting. Quickly, I know you have to go, Jackie. Just want to make sure this is, thank you for all coming. This is the first of 2 climate communications community chats. The next, which will happen in November, is going to be on how to broadcast it, and i.e. talking to media about it using your platform as an athlete. And that's going to be a 2-hour session. We're trying to, figure out the date and time. As soon as I get that, let you know. Hopefully you can do it. I think it's going to be worthwhile. Jackie, I know you got to go. Ciao. Jeannie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And one thing I wanted to say, because I don't know that it's clear to everybody, when Jeannie says she skis for Vanuatu, and Jeannie, correct me if I'm not saying it right, but she is, obviously Vanuatu is a tropical island. There is no snow in Vanuatu that I know of, and so Jeannie is using her dual citizenship to raise the profile of small island nations that are threatened by sea level rise, Vanuatu being the one that she will ski for, and hopefully will be able to ski half pipe ski at the 2026 Olympics in Milan and Cortina in Italy, and to raise the profile of this issue. Did I say it right?
Yes.
Metza Metz. And she also is the producer of the documentary film Mo Crazy Strong, which is about traumatic brain injury and how to treat it and how to treat it better, basically. Again, Jeannie, maybe I said it not exactly right.
Yeah, it's the story of my sister's traumatic brain injury and recovery, and how that started our nonprofit and advocacy work, basically.
So,
and these are the puppies.
So adorable.
Mush.
Well, so Gianna and Erica, the basketball players, made it to the end. No, I don't think that's coincidental. You guys always are willing to go overtime, and I will be seeing both of you play in person this season. And go Liberty, and go Jeannie.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to talk with us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
All right, and I will send this out to everybody else. Have a great day.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.